My name is Julie Pearson, Little Thunder. Today is Thursday, May 16th, 2016, and I'm interviewing Lester Harragarra for the Oklahoma Native Artist Project, sponsored by the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State University. We're at the Otoe-Missouria. We're in the new office, the Internet Loan Office. And Lester, you're Otoe-Missouria in Kiowa. You have an engineering degree. You work with the Otoe-Missouria Development Authority Board, and you also are involved in the construction of tribal enterprises and businesses. You are a fine art photographer as well, and lately you've become more active on the native art show scene, entering shows and winning awards for your work. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Lawton, Oklahoma in the 50s. Back then a lot of Kiowa and Comanche tribal members were born in Lawton Hospital. They just recently had the 100th year anniversary, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was hoping to go down there but never attended. So I spent a lot of time with my Kiowa grandparents, Lewis and Richinda Toivo. They lived west of Carnegie on my grandmother's allotted land, one of the original allottees for the Kiowas, 160 acres, a couple of miles west of Carnegie. So I spent a lot of time out there in the country, along with my Kiowa relatives there. My father, Kenneth Harragarra, is from this area here, Red Rock. He was born, back then they weren't born in a hospital, they were born in home. So both my mother and father were born at their homes in Red Rock, west of Red Rock, and then west of Carnegie. So.
What did your mom and dad do for a living?
My dad was in the service, World War II combat veteran. After the war, he was employed at Tinker Air Force Base, and he worked there until he retired. Sometime during that period, he was tribal chairman for a few years there, in the 70s, if I remember correctly. My mother is a librarian, and we spent some time at the boarding schools here in Oklahoma. Mm. She was a librarian at Sequoia. Later, after that, Chilocco, and I remember we lived on campus then. Chilocco at that time had over 1,200 students on the campus. So it was kind of at its peak at that time, which is a lot of fun to be in junior high. It was fourth grade when we moved there. I think we left when I was in 9th grade. So that was a good period there to be involved with the students from all over the United States. So I enjoyed that time. But she was a librarian there, and then she retired from Riverside Indian School as a librarian. And
so you talked about having a good relationship with being close to your Kiowa grandparents. How about on the other side of your family, your dad's side?
My father's parents, actually, I was very young, meaning 1 or 2 years old when my grandmother Mary passed away. Mm-hmm. Mary Harragarra. Mm-hmm. She was instrumental in the Otoe War Mothers Society. Actually, I think, if I remember correctly, it was the first Indian War Mothers Association. So she was president of that for a number of years. Her 3 sons were in the service. One of them, my dad, Eugene, and Clifford were the other veterans that were my brothers. So my grandfather, Moses Harragarra, was born in Nebraska. There's a part of our history there that is relatively unknown, I guess, to the general public. I think most people think the Indians here in Oklahoma chose to be here, but not everybody chose to be here. We were removed from Nebraska along with some of the other tribes in that area, the Ponca tribe being one of them, Pawnee, Iowa, and Ponca tribes were removed from Nebraska and relocated here in north central Oklahoma. So my grandfather was young at that time, 14 years old, and he was one of the ones that walked down from Nebraska to where we are now. The Otoes have, throughout the year, they have different chiefs, and it's by clanship. So one clan would be in charge during the summer, and the summer is Buffalo Clan, and that's what my grandfather was, and that's what I am, Buffalo Clan. So he was hereditary chief of the Buffalo Clan. So he spoke very little English, and I just remember vaguely some glimpses of him. He was tall. He passed away when he was 93 years old. And what people tell me about him is that they always remember him walking. That was what he did every morning. He would get up and walk. And when he lived west of Red Rock there, and also allotted land. So I remember him. We wore braids. He would roll his own cigarettes, Bull Durham cigarettes. And he was, since he was hard of hearing, he talked real loud. But he spoke mostly Otoe, and you know, very few people now understand the language. But vaguely remember my grandfather Moses Harragarra.
And in terms of being around the language up there, around your Kiowa grandparents, you were around him.
Yes, I was around them quite a bit, and they spoke mostly Kiowa to their friends. As grandchildren, we didn't really learn Kiowa, but we could understand a little bit of what they were talking about. But they decided back then that it would be better for us as children growing up in a different society to not learn Kiowa, unfortunately. You know, we kind of view that differently, but back then, that was their train of thought, was with that it would help us in school and to be more, I guess, accepted by the dominant society, as everybody calls them. So I spent a lot of time with them, with not only them, but also their friends and, you know, sisters, brothers and sisters that were our relatives also. Definitely a different value system, first of all, but definitely a different perspective on life. So that you don't see anymore, unfortunately. But there's quite a bit of difference that I can see now from when they grew up. My grandfather Lewis was born on the banks of the Washita. He estimates around 1893. Back then they didn't have any records. So he remembers that they would go once a month to Anadarko to collect their rations. And I remember living with him and asking him all kinds of questions about what Indians did, and how fast a horse was, and how fast a buffalo was. But I do remember several things that he talked about, and one of them was he remembered there wasn't anything west of Chickasha. The rail line went through Chickasha, but there was nothing, no fences, wagon trails was all there were. So everything was open, no telephone poles, no roads. So he talked about that. So he was, my grandparents were older when I was born, and you know, came to spend some time with them. They were in their 70s by then. Probably that generation had a glimpse of what it truly was to be Kiowa because of their parents. You know, they were their parents were the ones that were captured in Peladera Canyon. So when you look at what they could see as they were a younger person from their parents that was taught, they were still living on the plains, still hunting buffalo. And then to where they saw their world changing as they got older. Meaning World War II, all the technology that was being invented, all the songs that they knew that were suppressed for years, and then in the 50s they were gradually revived, the gourd dance and Black Leggings, and so they saw those changes there. My grandfather Lewis wrote a lot of and composed a lot of the War Mother songs. But not only that, there were other songs he wrote. He was a composer, and I remember as a young child, he bought a recorder, and that was fascinating to me. But he bought a recorder, and he would sing a song, and then he would talk in Kiowa. And what he was describing was what the song was about. And my mother still has those tapes. I think she's had some of those digitized, but I'm not pretty sure on that. I'm pretty sure she had some of them, but I don't know if she had all of them. But, I remember trying to play with the recorder. But yeah, those are some of the memories I have of my grandparents, Kiowa grandparents.
Precious memories there. So what is your earliest memory of seeing Native art, however you would define it?
Obviously, it's through my mother being a librarian. After school, I'd get off the bus and go to the library at Chilanco. It was a large library. So just being around books all the time. Just looking at, obviously back then you didn't pay too much attention to reading. I was more interested in the image itself. So I can just think of just being in a library there in 4th, 5th grade, looking at books and looking at images and looking at artists' renditions of George Catlin was probably one of the more influences that I have as far as art was concerned, and then the realism that he portrayed in his portraits. So those I would think were probably early influence, which was just that. And then as I got older, then you recognize that you can, being kind of technical first of all, but just being fascinated with a camera, just as a toy first of all. My aunt, I think, bought my first camera when I was, 7 or 8 years old. So just a little instamatic, Polaroid. So, just had a fascination with this technology first of all, but then you look at the capability of being able to record something.
So were you going around just taking, I think back then there was film and there was developing, and it could get kind of expensive. What was it like with the camera in your hand? What were you taking pictures of, and how did you?
Well, when I first got a real camera, when you were 8,
when you got that first camera.
Then you would take the film and to the drugstore and send it in and wait a week or two for it to come back. So
and your family was supportive, sounds like.
Yeah. Back then, most of those cameras, that you could almost always take a good picture, but there was always things that I recognized that influenced the way the camera worked. Lighting, obviously, the more critical aspect of it. So you get some pictures, and some of them turned out, and some of them didn't. So what I tried to figure out was, okay, what made this picture not turn out? I would have liked this to be a good picture. So there was that, the film. Now the other camera that became popular when I was younger was a Polaroid, where you could wait 2 or 3 minutes and the image would appear on the photo. So that was always fascinating. Back then it was just black and white. Later they developed a Polaroid in color, but the black and white images were the first camera I got, was a Polaroid.
Did you get one of the Polaroids
Yes,
too?
yeah. I think my grandmother bought me that Polaroid camera.
And were you taking pictures mainly of people, family members, or landscapes, or just
Back then it was just anything, I think the pack only had eight photos in it, so you had to be very conservative about what you took a picture of. So I remember playing with that. That was just, it was something that fascinated me, was how that happened. As I got older and got into college is when I call it my first real camera, a 35mm Canon. And you had the same option then. You could take it to a lab and get it processed. But then going to school at UNM, they had a photo lab. And in the photo lab I learned how to develop and do my own printing. And from there you could spend hours, first of all, doing that process, printing and developing and doing the burning and dodging and cropping, and from that you recognize that probably what I've always concentrated on and still do is try to improve my images.
Mm.
That's one of the aspects of photography that is ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
You always want to get a better image. So that process started back then in the early 80s, as in the darkroom was trying to take a better picture.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously light and the settings on the camera influence that. So
Mm-hmm. You didn't do any photography in high school? Didn't have access to any
not really.
classes?
No, not really. Never did any classes in high school. I'm just self-taught.
Right.
Just.
How did you end up at University of New Mexico?
Actually, my mother told me this engineering program that was started out there, and it was geared towards Native Americans and engineering. So
Mm-hmm.
it was the program out there at UNL, University of New Mexico. It was called NAPCO, Native American Program College of Engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Went out there in the mid-70s, I believe it was. And then always wanted to buy a real camera. So
Well,
always
I
saved
wondered
up.
if you'd been torn, if you were thinking about, well, I'd like to be a photographer, make my living with photography, or did you just also have this other interest in technical things and how structures worked?
Probably it was that more than anything. It was just had a curiosity in
Mm-hmm.
mechanical, how things worked and functioned, and then a camera had settings that you had to set correctly. It was obviously a mechanical instrument, but probably the aspect I liked about it was also a creative tool. So that was the other fascinating part, was just trying to figure out not only how to set the camera, but also how to get a good image, a nice image.
Mm-hmm.
So that interest was, as a child, like I said, it was just trying to, just fascinating to take a picture.
Now, at University of New Mexico, they probably had people who were studying photography.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any interaction with them, or?
No, there were other students, architect students, other colleges there that I worked with at the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and they also had an interest in cameras. Back then, in the late 70s, early 80s, that was kind of one of the popular things people did, was have a 35 millimeter. Nikon had their version and Canon had their version, and they weren't really that expensive.
Right.
So there were quite a few people that carried around a 35 millimeter. I remember seeing old interviews of Johnny Carson, and several of the actors that he would have in interview, they would have their 35 millimeter out there. So it was just kind of one of those things that everybody kind of got into. So, and me being one of them. So there were several of us students that that had cameras. I don't know really how many pursued that later on in life, but as I got older, I got more interested in it. And probably what motivated me more than anything back then was, for example, this Black Leggings
Mm-hmm.
photo. As I got older, recognizing that if you look at that image there's several of them that have gone on. One of them was a well-known artist, Chattelson.
Mm-hmm.
He's there in the front. So
I didn't see him.
yeah. So as I got older, that's probably
I see.
was the motivation, was to
Mm-hmm.
capture that event primarily, but also knowing some of those World War II veterans that were in this organization.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just my way of contributing, really. That, and it's also, I look at it as a way to preserve our culture currently. 100 years from now, there are going to be Indians, there are going to be Kiowas, there's going to be Otoe-Missourias. So this is my contribution 100 years from now, I'll have something for them to look at.
Mm-hmm.
So, and now we have the capability of video, which adds another aspect to our culture. So,
Had you seen any native photography at that point? Were you aware of any other native photographers that were, of course, Pow-wows, the
Yeah.
famous one, but
Yes.
I'm thinking about Zig
out
Jackson
west,
or any
yes,
of those
out
people.
west there in the southwest, in Arizona and New Mexico, there were a few Navajo photographers that I can think of. I don't remember the names right now, but I do remember looking at their images and thinking, you know, first of all, they take great images, and you just kind of look at those and think, I'd like to take some pictures like this one of these days. So, yeah, in a way, you're influenced by those. Some of those artists, you know, that were in acrylics, T.C. Cannon, you know, he had a 35 millimeter. There were several of them that did photography, but maybe their specialty was in some other art form, but they did dabble in photography. So I didn't really look at it back then as a true art form. I looked at it as a way of just recording something. Later on, I would say probably in the past, maybe 5 years, maybe it's longer, I started doing these art shows. I never really participated in these art shows because I was just trying to take pictures of events.
Right.
And then gravitated towards, because people always ask, what do you do with these images? And say, well, I don't do anything with them now, but at some point I plan to.
Right.
And I'm still planning to. So.
Yeah, and I was, because I listened to one of your interviews in which you mentioned that you had from 8 to 10,000.
Oh, no, it's quite a bit more than that. It's easily over 100 to 200,000.
Wow.
I don't really know how many exactly I have.
Right.
But yeah, it's in that area.
So as you say, you know, you approached it, and then you've approached it, and still your primary goal is to document, and in the process you're documenting individuals for their families and things. So do you sometimes give them copies of photographs?
Yeah, I can, at the Black Leggings, for example, in one day I can probably shoot 3,000 images. So, you know, if there's somebody, a personal friend of mine may ask, and so I'll go through and pull out those images and get them a copy.
Right.
I hope to do that for all the Black Leggings, but it's one of those projects that I would still am working on. I would still like to do something like that.
Right.
So right now I just kind of do the group shots, you know, where there's several of them, but I do try to take individual shots of all the dancers as are out there. I was asked to start doing this in the late 90s, so I've been doing this ever since then.
Wow.
I don't think I've missed any of the dances in the past probably 15, 16 years.
Wow.
So, and back then there were still a lot of World War II veterans that were still active. Now I don't think there's any. I think I took a picture of the last 3 World War II veterans about 3 or 4 years ago. So, yeah, I hope to do something with these. You know, even just a slide presentation is what I wanted to do, was to start out with that.
Right. Now you got a one-man show in 2009 at Southern Plains Museum, and I didn't know if the entire subject of the show was the Black Leggings ceremonial, or was it a range of pictures?
It was Black Leggings strictly. In addition to the still images that I had, the University of Oklahoma had a group of researchers there. One of them is a young man named Michael Jordan, and he had done some video. So in addition to the still images on the walls, they had a video that played
I see.
of the Black Leggings. So it was one of the few videos that the Black Leggings allow. So.
And you spend a lot of time photographing at Pow-wows. That's your...
Yes, yeah, I do try to photograph as much as I can, mostly just Indian life as it is today. Meaning not only just the dancers, but the camps, people cooking fry bread, people, you know, putting on their outfits. Here in Oklahoma, though, it's a little more difficult as opposed to the northern tribes, where first of all, they dance during the day when you have good light. I try not to use flash, but I do at times use flash, but I like to stick with the natural lighting if I can. Around here, like I said, our dances start at 8 and 9, and so I lose a lot of the good lights. So
I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, definitely on a different schedule. Let's see, you won a couple of awards at the Red Earth Indian Arts Festival in photography, didn't you?
yes, I've won.
That must have been when you started entering.
Yes, yeah,
What was that like for you?
I got probably the first time I won, obviously, and excited about it. You know, you always kind of look at, like I said, I'll always look at images and think, well, if I tried this, if I was over here 2 more feet, or if I had the camera set a little differently, you'd come out with a better image. So
You're always being critical of what.
yeah, and I think everybody does that.
Yeah,
you know.
all artists.
Everybody wants to do something, first of all, that they feel represents a people.
Right.
But most importantly, that aspect of it is trying to represent. Because I think at some point, some of these images that I have of the Black Leggings were displayed overseas at a museum in, I think it was somewhere in Ireland, maybe in Wales. It's been a while since that request came in, but I did send some over there. So that's what I look at. I think the commander of the Black Leggings, Linda Palmer, took some over to when he was in Normandy. So gave some to some of those people over there. So that's what that's why I'm kind of critical about having everything looking as nice as I can. So.
Right. Those issues of representation, and of course photography comes for Native people comes with a lot of baggage. So being a Native photographer, how do you approach things? Or
probably the misconception that Natives have is that you make a lot of money doing this, and unfortunately that's a misconception. I tell them, most of them can get online and look things up through Google or whatever Bing or whatever searches you have out there. And I said, look at these images and see what they're going to cost. You can go to stock photo, and realistically, those images there are from $8 to $20, $25. I said, so when somebody sees an image of themselves and they think that I'm making a lot of money off of it, first of all, I don't sell them. I don't do any stock photos. And the reason why is it's, $8 to $25. So the unfortunate part about it is there's not much money to be made. And the other side of it is the pictures that I do take and a family asks for them, I typically, just do it at cost, because it's something I'm not doing to make money. It's hard to do that to make money. If I took other types of images, maybe weddings or sunsets or things like that, that's where, and that's what I do at these art shows, is they're generic photos, they're not of individuals.
Right.
So, but I would say probably 60%, 80% of my images are of people. I do these other images, first of all, because they just happen to be there and recognize a nice scene.
The beauty.
So I do. Then those are the ones that I sell, like a teepee or the buffalo over here. Those type of images I do sell and enter into these art shows.
Well, and then that's the other part of it, the business part. The images that you do sell, how do you figure out how to price them?
Mostly it's just what I look at the cost of what it costs to get the image produced, printed and mounted. I just typically kind of get online and kind of see what everybody else is selling theirs for. When you look at the cost of what it has in what it cost me to get all this together, I remember I was boarding a plane and going to California one time and was running a little late, and they were asking everybody to check their baggage, and I had my camera gear in one bag, and I was going to put it in the overhead. And she asked me to check it, and I said, okay, I'll be willing to check it if you're willing to insure it for me. She said, how much do we have to insure it for? And I said, probably $10,000.
Wow.
So when you look at the investment you have in the equipment, the cameras, the lenses, tripods, the other investment is nowadays with digital, it's the computers that you use and the software. I do this just to document my culture. I don't look at it as a way to make a living. So I'm not really, I don't really have that aspect to push me along or to steer me. It's just, I think if I were in that situation, and I think you asked that question earlier about doing this as a living, that kind of adds another, I guess, aspect of pressure and to where you have to do this and to survive. I'm fortunately that I'm not in that situation. I just do this because, first of all, I enjoy this, and it's something that I look at a contribution to my culture, just like the other people in my life have done. They always have some talent. You know, maybe it's making moccasins, maybe it's singing. This is my contribution.
What's a project that you're currently working on, a project or a series?
The ongoing project is the Black Leggings project.
It's the Black Leggings.
There's so many images I have now. So that's ongoing, and there's several ways. Nowadays, you know, they have different ways of, when I first started this, it was very expensive to get a book produced. One of my good friends is David Fitzgerald.
Oh yeah.
Well-known photographer here in Oklahoma. And I've known him since the early 90s. And back then, he had a good publisher in Portland, Oregon. And he told me the cost of getting a book produced, and it was, to me, it was astronomical. There's no way I could convince the people I know or some of the tribes they're involved with to do something like that. So he's had quite a bit of success with the Cherokees and Chickasaws, and his latest tribe was the Choctaws. Obviously, they're well funded, so that's how that occurred. But when I was aware of the cost, I realized, you know, there's got to be some other ways of doing this. And fortunately, the technology has progressed to where, you know, you could produce something in Photoshop and Adobe, that software there, and it's not as near as expensive as what it used to be. So that's one of the projects I would like to do, work on, concentrate on, is getting some of these images of the Black Leggings. And it's one of those things to where I would need to devote a lot of time to it, because first of all, I want the images to look nice, and just the color correction, the software now is so sophisticated. Is you wait another 6 months and there's a newer version coming out and it has different capabilities. So just working with the software on some of that. Some of these older images I have are film. So then the limitation there is very few labs nowadays do film.
Wow.
There's one in Dallas, and that's the closest one. So I had to send the black and white images I have, film strips down there, and have them reproduced. And, so I want to do this Black Leggings project here. I have so many images, obviously there's going to be several you know, I wouldn't call them maybe a series. I have no idea how I'm going to do this. Now what's happening with in their organization is the Vietnam era veterans, you know, are the ones that are taking over and are themselves getting older. So I'm kind of looking at, you know, World War II first, and then maybe the Korean era. There weren't that many veterans back then. So then Vietnam, and then most recently the Iraq War. So Desert Storm, there's a few veterans that are in that conflict. So that's probably the biggest project I want to work on right now, is just finishing that up.
Right. Well, you're doing the Artesian show, I guess, next weekend.
Yes, Memorial Day weekend.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess this is just your second year.
Yes, I participated last year. Was the first year I was involved in that, and one of my images I submitted to, one of them won first.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So I enjoy that show down there. The Chickasaw Nation really supports their artists, and they're trying to develop this art show into something that has a lot of significance in this area. So they have the resources first of all, but I think they recognize that a part of all Native cultures is their art. So. Have you ever done IFAM or Santa Fe Indian Market? Yes, I've done IFAM.
I thought maybe.
Yeah.
When was the first time you did that?
This year will be their third year, so I'll be out there in August for the third time. I did their first one, 2014. They don't have any judging or anything. It's just an art show.
Was it a pretty good sales show?
Yes. Yeah. It was, they start on actually Thursday. So it's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And of course, Indian Market is Saturday and Sunday.
Right.
So, yeah, I enjoy going out there, meeting other people and seeing my friends.
Right. And I think there has been a shift in terms of, because I remember being at art markets with paintings, and there was like resistance on the part of people to pay for photographs at all. It was like, well, but I think that has changed. I think people are recognizing that. And I was wondering too what your involvement is. Do you mat or frame your photographs, or how do you display them?
Yes, I do. For a while I used to do my own matting.
Okay.
When I first started out, I was just doing my own matting. The printing is probably the more difficult part, because it's the color is very critical in a photograph. So one printer may have a good tech that understands the color accuracy is important. They may have another tech that, you know, just there for the money. So there's this lab I work with in Oklahoma City that I've been working with for a number of years, and he's very critical in his work. So I use him exclusively for all my printing. So I don't really do any printing myself. I tried to at one time, but it's pretty involved. And obviously the printers themselves get more expensive, so I don't do any printing. But I did do the matting for a while. So.
Right.
The other art show that I've been, I think the first art show I participated in was Red Earth.
Okay.
And that might have been 4 or 5 years ago. I don't remember when.
Right.
But that one's coming up second week in June. So.
Yes, it's show season.
Yeah.
Do you do any non-native shows?
No, I don't. was trying to remember, I tried one, I think.
Was it here in Oklahoma?
Yes, yeah. No, I don't really do those. It's kind of like I have limited time, so I kind of pick the ones that I would like to participate in. So, and typically they're local. So,
Right.
other than Santa Fe, who doesn't enjoy going out to Santa Fe?
Exactly. You haven't had any dealings with galleries, I take it.
No, I don't. I don't. I've been asked, but I just haven't gone down that road yet. When I first started, I primarily photographed people, and so that was the limitation there. Is I didn't want to display
Yes.
people that, first of all, some of them have an objection to it, and I didn't want to violate that. So I was very cognizant of people's images being out there, especially if they didn't want them. So, and that's when I started gravitating towards taking other pictures of animals and teepees and landscapes. And that's when I started doing the art shows then. So.
How has your approach to photography changed over the years?
At the beginning, it was just trying to master the settings on the camera. Learning what settings, how it affected the image. Not only that, it was just back then it was film, so it wasn't just the camera settings that you could manipulate and change the image. It was also in a dark room. So you could spend hours in a dark room on one image, dodging and burning and changing the lighting. So at the beginning it was just learning the techniques, how to take a good image, how to manipulate the camera, get the settings and the lighting correct. So I concentrated mostly on just trying to learn that aspect of a good image. And then as I got older and felt more confident in how the camera was set, then you start looking, I did anyway, start looking at the more creative aspect of an image. So that's probably where I am now. Now I use flash, and so that's another aspect of controlling light. And that's what photography is all about, is controlling light. So they have different type of wireless flashes and controls on a light that you can modify and change an image. So I'm working in that now. There's a newer type of lighting technique called light painting that I've been getting into. I don't have any images currently, but that's one of the newer techniques, I guess, that I want to work in. So.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
So you're playing with the light actually while you're trying to take the picture.
Yes, what it is it's typically done in the evening or at night, and what you do is you set the camera to where the exposure is open, the shutter is open, and then you use a small light. Could be a flashlight, could be a larger flashlight, could be your cell phone. So, but what you do with the light is you paint what you want illuminated, and then the rest of the image remains dark. So it's pretty dramatic effect if you get it right.
For
So.
sure.
Around here in Oklahoma, it's kind of hard to do it just because of all the wind.
Oh, yes.
So the camera has to be absolutely still, as well as the subject. So if you're taking a picture of a skull, it's easier for that to hold still. But if you have a live subject, it's hard for them to stay still that long. So you get a little blur in it. So that's the obstacles there. But yeah, that's the newest technique I'm working on.
Do any of your children take photographs?
No, they don't. I have a daughter. I have several nieces and a nephew, and I've always saved my older camera gear, hoping that one day they would pick it up. But I will say this, it's time consuming.
Yes.
And I think that's probably the biggest obstacle people have with it. I think a lot of people have interest in photography. As they get more knowledge about it, I think one of the things they realize is that it takes a long time to really learn how to take a good image. The other side of that is these cameras nowadays are so sophisticated, you can put them in the automatic mode or program mode and you can get a fairly good image. But that's one aspect of it. The other is just developing something in the software end of it, where you're doing some color correction or putting an effect on the image itself to change its look, and that's what some of these are here.
Right.
So that's another whole different art, is Photoshop and manipulating the actual image. And some people gravitate towards that. A lot of graphic artists, that's how they started. So I know a little of that, but not that much. I just strictly want to stick with just first of all the photo. Start with that. So.
What would you tell a young native photographer who, someone who's aspiring to do this, maybe full time? Or maybe just this community, a way of giving back to the community.
First of all, like I said, the technology's improved enough to where you can buy a basic camera and it's going to take a real good image, simply because the software in the camera itself recognizes the lighting situation, and so it sets the camera properly. So it's easier than it used to be. I don't see too many photographers out there that are native. At one time there used to be, like I said, when in the late 70s and early 80s, that was kind of the thing to do, was get a 35 millimeter. But I don't see that many now. What I do see is a lot of young people involved in video. And I think that's probably the bigger interest is video. So that leaves open, still photography. There are a few, and they're very talented, that I know, that I see in Santa Fe. I think there's plenty of room there for somebody young to get into still photography using digital SLR. Now with these Eastern tribes, they have a lot of resources, and I could see an opportunity there where somebody could work with one of those tribes there, Chickasaws, Choctaws, Creeks, I think they can probably make a living at it, really. So, and develop from there an art. So.
You mentioned, we sort of covered, I think, some of the technical challenges of doing digital photography. Have you ever experimented with collage, or like using photographs in a different way?
Yes, there's the Photoshop out there, and it's easy to do collages in Photoshop. It's one of those things to where I recognize it can be done, but I haven't really spent too much time on doing that. There's several companies that specialize just strictly in photography, but Adobe is probably the premier software company out there, and they have Photoshop and they have Lightroom and they have software that they use for movies and video. So, but there's other companies out there that also do photography software, and I have several versions of those that I use. I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Well, if you'd ever experimented with using photographs in a different way, or with collage or something.
Yeah, I do use this software to change the image, and right now there's a lot of interest in get that old photographic look where it looks scratchy and areas are blurred and the color's a little off. So there's a lot of companies that produce software to get that kind of effect.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and there's so many to choose from. You spend a lot of time going through all those options and settings, and so I kind of dabbled in some of that newer software.
Right.
So.
When you have photographs at an art show, what size and what finish do you prefer when you're getting them developed? Is there a particular size that sells well, or particular finish? Matte or
the smaller ones seem to sell because obviously they're not as much to produce, and the cost is relatively affordable for most people. I prefer the larger images like we have on the wall over here. And the latest thing I've done is these are mounted on an aluminum panel, a photograph mounted on an aluminum panel. I do have matted and framed images that I do sell. But one of the comments I hear as people look at the photographs is, I don't know if this frame will go with the other frame I have in the living room, or do you sell just the image because I would like to change the mat to match another mat.
Right.
So so lately I've started using this new technique called mounted on aluminum panel, and what that does for me as a photographer is it eliminates the distraction of having a nice frame and a nice mat, and that they match the image. I eliminate that. Primarily I just want to display the image itself.
It's all about the image. Yeah, it's a nice look.
So that's probably my latest way of displaying. But I will try some of these on some other type of medium, canvas maybe. There's different types of canvas that they use and different type of paper. So I'll try some on different surfaces and textures and get a different look. So.
How important is it for you to title your photos?
I think it's important. I spend a lot of time on them, and that's why probably most of them are untitled. But the ones that I do title, I like to spend a lot of time on that. So.
And do you sign them on the photograph, or
yes,
how do you handle it? Okay.
If I remember, there are times when I don't remember to sign them. So. My intention is to sign all of them.
In a corner, or
yeah. But unfortunately, that didn't happen.
So what's your creative process for a photograph? Do you come up with an idea maybe that you want to, say, shoot a particular landscape with at a certain time of day, or?
Yeah, there is a process I go through it, and probably where I learned this from was from our friend David Fitzgerald. He was really an artist, as an acrylic artist, doing paintings. And how he got into photography was that he wanted to take a picture of a subject, so he took a picture of it, and then he would go back in his studio and he would paint. Along the way, he started appreciating the photographs, and that's how he got into photography, was through that process. But what I learned from him was how first of all, he's done probably close to 20 coffee table books in his career. So he has a technique down in a process that he goes through. And so I've learned from him how to stage these, how to plan them. And that's what he does. He does a drawing of what he has in mind of what he wants to try to photograph. Not that it's always going to turn out like that, but at least he has an outline of how he wants to work and how he wants the image to look. So there are, I try to adopt that as much as I can. I do go out there with something in mind as how I want this to look. Not that it's always going to turn out like that. There were some times when you can go out there and spend 2 or 3 days and really not come out with anything you want to display. but there are times when you make a mistake and it turns out better than what you thought it would be. The camera's set wrong, or a movement happens and it adds to the picture. So, but yeah, for the most part, I do try to have an idea in mind and try to reproduce that, and try different variations of that. So there's two aspects of it nowadays that didn't exist during film, and that's the aspect of these cameras are very sophisticated now. So you have a lot of control in the camera itself. In addition to that, the after production, running it through software, you have another avenue of being creative in that aspect, and that's where graphic artists come into play. It's just that capability. So yes, I do have an idea of how I want these to turn out, and most of them are something that I've created. It's something that I've seen go into conferences or caught a glimpse of from these millions and millions of photographers worldwide. So I do try to get online and look at images and see
That's
something.
part of your research.
Yeah, and try to see something that I would like to reproduce using, you know, a native theme. So.
And then another creative decision, I guess, is also whether you do a sepia treatment or you do color, or I think you mentioned most of your black and white are taken from film.
Yes. So when I get my film, a 35mm film printed, you know, you can opt for the sepia setting in that. And again, that goes back to if you go to a different lab, they're going to have a different color. Some obviously you like and turn out better than the other. So, but I haven't done any film printing in quite a while. Most of mine are digital. So they can come pretty close to reproducing something I did 4 or 5 years ago. I can take the image back in a digital format and show them, you know, what you did 5 years ago. Could you get something to match that? And they can come pretty close. So again, it's the software that I use to take the color out of an image and put it all in black and white, or add a little tint to it. And this is an example of something that was black and white, and I added red tint to it.
Yeah.
That looks like a sepia image. So.
Yeah. What was your biggest photographic challenge?
Money. The expense of the cameras and the lenses. Primarily, it's the lenses. They can get up to $10,000. I don't own any that cost $10,000. One of these days, yes.
Right.
So it's the cost of the camera body itself, the lenses, and then the accessories, the flash, and the radio controllers to control the flash. So it's the hardware. I was trying to think of the other obstacles creatively, and you know, I think everybody runs into those every artist runs into a period of where, you know, it just ain't there today kind of thing. So, so yeah, sometimes I have days like that too, where you know, nothing's going to happen today.
No inspiration today. Well, you know, looking back on all these years you've been photographing, what was the kind of turning point, do you think, that you might not have recognized it as a turning point in your photography, but it may have been a point at which you definitely started down this road?
And that would be more serious about it. I can look back probably in the late 90s maybe. Back then I was still shooting film, but it was probably recognizing, again, I go back to the Black Leggings, recognizing that those older gentlemen weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time I had this little web page, and I think I had probably 16 or 17 elders in there. And within a matter of 2 years, probably 3/4 of them,
Mm-hmm.
you know, were no longer with us. So that was probably, like I said, in the late 90s, and as you watch these dancers get older, and then, you know, at some point not be able to participate. So that and just getting older, first of all. So, that would be the turning point then. So then it became more of a trying to document and not looking at it not looking at this as a way, first of all, to make money. Not looking at this as a way to be artistic. It was just more of a way of documenting. Because that's what you see. I worked for the Department of Transportation for a number of years and had the opportunity to travel the state. And when I had an opportunity, I would stop off at these different tribal offices. And every one of them you can go into, and what you're going to recognize, just like you came in here, is these old photographs. So just recognizing that and being exposed to that all the time. Every time you went to a different tribal office, you'll see a photograph that's 100 years old. So that's probably what motivated me and inspired me at that time, was at some point 100 years from now, these images that I have, you know, hopefully some people will appreciate it. So.
Right. What's been a high point of your photography so far?
I think it's probably just being able to look back and looking at the images that I have of people in the late 90s, or excuse me, the late 80s and early 90s, when I was using film. Although I didn't have very many of black and white, because it was film and obviously more costly. But probably the significant part about that is just recognizing that who they were, meaning they were older Kiowas, and not only Kiowas, but there were other tribes, you know, Cheyenne, Otoes, Ponkas. I don't have very many of them, but there were some of those people that held a prominent place in their tribe or in their culture. So that would probably be, I think, probably a turning point where I recognize that, like, as again, I go back to what my contribution is to my culture is that.
How about a low point at which you've been the most discouraged?
Probably, I think every native photographer at some point has to deal with this, and it's simply because most native photographers are aware of the importance of a cultural event. So one of the things and that's probably one of the first things I ran into was, you know, what do you do with these photographs? Do you sell them? Do you have permission to do this? One of the things I recognize, and at some point you have to develop a thick skin to this, because you're always going to be criticized. But let's say you could have a group of 25 people and 24 are going to have no problem with what you do, but there's going to be one that objects. And as I got older, I realized that one person typically that objects, that's just the way they are. You know, they don't only object just to what you're doing, they object to what other people are doing. So So you probably, I have had learned how to, I guess, put that in its proper perspective and recognize that there are 20 people that support what you do.
Right.
So that was probably, you know, it took a while to kind of get to that point, was to recognize that, okay, this is just one person. And really when you got to know them a little better, you realized that they were just somebody difficult to begin with.
Right.
So.
Thank you for sharing that. So what do you see happening with your photography when you retire?
I hope to concentrate more on this, you know, finish these projects up to Black Leggings.
Maybe do a coffee table, well, it wouldn't be a coffee table book in that case, but maybe do one with other photographs. Or...
Yes, that, and I do hope to do a book, you know. We talked about that. I have several friends that, one's a well-known author. He's wrote a lot of, he's done a lot of research on Kiowa culture. So he's agreed to write the text. So hopefully we'll get something going here before too long.
That would be great. Is there anything we forgot to talk about before we take a look at your photographs?
I can't think of anything. I'm sure there is.
Okay, well if you think of it in between, we're just going to pause for a minute and I'll...
Okay.
Okay, you want to tell us about this photograph?
Okay, this one I took, I think it was a couple of years ago. It's in the Wichita Wildlife Refuge down there west of Lawton. I've been down there several times, and this particular day I got lucky and took all three of these images in this room during that same visit I was down there. I had been down there several times before, and you know, see one or two buffalo, and
Right.
you wonder where they all are.
Yeah, exactly.
But this day they decided to hang out by the road, so I took this one down there. All these really are in color, but I've changed the color of them and the texture of them by using software. So I start out with Lightroom, do some, and then gravitate and change the image, and put it in Photoshop, and then do a little more touching. So, in some images, I just do a straight photo, like this Black Leggings image here. I just want to recreate what I actually saw during that event. So.
Right.
But others to try to get a little more artistic with them, and that's what this one represents, is that.
Right. All right, and here's our Black Leggings photograph. And
yes, I took this one. I don't remember exactly what the year was. Maybe within 5 years, maybe maybe a little longer. This is as the Black Leggings are entering into the dance arena, and several of those members, unfortunately, have gone on. World War II, primarily. The ones that have gone on, there's a couple of them there, but there's Vietnam era, well-known artist Sherman Chattelson there on the right.
right.
Bill Ware in the front, Korean veteran. So these images like this, I just don't try to do anything artistic with them. I just want to make sure I get the color correction, make sure that everything's in focus, and just try to take a accurate image.
Right. Beautiful. Okay, here's another one down in the Wichita Mountains, I guess.
Yes. Yes, this was taken at the same time I took this other image here. This happened to catch
That's
the
it.
clouds
Yeah.
right, and a lot of this is just being there at the right time and right place. You know, you could take an image with no clouds and it looks a little flat. And then the buffalo, of course, you know, they move around quite a bit.
Right.
What was surprising about photographing buffalo is they don't know, people think they're kind of like cows where they just kind of stay in one place and eat. These guys move constantly.
Right.
Kind of like a lawnmower, they just keep moving. And so
I love the way the gold just bounces, you know, you've got it
Yeah,
in the flowers and in the clouds.
yeah, that was taken in the spring.
Do the Otoe-Missouris have a herd, buffalo herd?
In the 70s, we had a herd. They were very difficult to maintain in a small confined area. They were from a reservation in South Dakota, I believe, where they had large areas to roam. So when they were given to us, we tried to maintain them in our property, which wasn't very big back then. And they just were a little more difficult. They were used to quite open spaces. So that was in the 70s. Currently, we are working on trying to acquire some buffalo, working with a gentleman that has some ranch in Amarillo, or north of Amarillo. So we're working on that, and I'll be visiting with him today.
Oh, great.